Hello to all the listeners. My name is Auren Israel and I am the chairman of Auren Israel, the leading international consulting firm in Israel. Auren Israel is part of international network of offices operating in more than 70 countries and over 300 branches worldwide. As part of our podcast channel, we are excited to share with you the special podcast season which focus on the world of life science and their business application. We will host here key people who will share with us their point of view about research, academia, application, and business in the field of science. Along with me is Mr. Amir Kahani, the managing partner of VSO Consulting Division at Auren Israel. Shalom, Amir.
Shalom and good morning.
Together with us this morning is Dan Gelvan, who will speak with us about digital health in the post-COVID era. Dr. Gelvan is a business economist who has been in the forefront of healthcare and life science in Israel in the past 15 years. Dan has been a founder and also a CEO of a number of companies in the past 15 years, and currently today he's handling a venture capital. Dan, I'll be happy if you can speak with us and tell us a little bit about your background, your history, and what's brought you to this point today.
Thank you very much for hosting me here today. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I've been doing healthcare and life sciences for more than 25 years, most of it in Israel. I'm a trained business economist, but I've been doing all the heavy lifting, such as pharma development, implantable devices, PMAs, but also the lighter stuff, such as 510K and 505(b)(2). So a couple of years ago, I found that digital health is going to change the future of medicine, and I decided to make a strategic move from the traditional healthcare and life science and get into digital health. I'm very excited about things such as monitoring, such as early detection, such as predictions. And I thought that the way we have to approach this is to work with founders in the early stages and try to get them on the right track from day one. And that's why I set up t-syte as a means of achieving this. So a lot of entrepreneurs who enter this field are not particularly experienced in how to build a business. And in digital health, you are at a very early stage, you're ready to hit the market. Actually, in pharma, it may take 10 or 15 years, and also in medical devices, it can take 7 to 10 years. But in digital health, in many cases, people come to me and they've managed to develop an MVP in bootstrap mode. So what we do at t-syte is that we combine a financial investment with very heavy monitoring, mentoring, in order to help these companies to get on the right track from day one. So we have companies that within the first couple of months already start to generate market traction. So essentially, my route has been to go from traditional healthcare and life science and get into digital health.
Dan, can you add please a little bit explanation regarding your company currently today, the activity and the focus?
Yes, so we do is we work with the founders. They come to us. We work very much like a VC fund, so we have deal flow coming from all over, and we'll invest a couple of $100,000, which is usually the first money coming in. My last two term sheets had a condition that the founders had to establish a company before we invest. So we're really the earliest kind of investor you can get. And then we'll work with the founders in a very didactic fashion. We'll work with them on the value proposition. Who are the stakeholders? What is the competition? What is the go to market strategy? How does the business model canvas look for you? And then we try to get them up and running as fast as possible. Really, the goal is to be a smart investor that not only invests money, but essentially does everything that is needed to get the company up and running and make a successful business out of it.
This sounds great. So let me ask you a first question. You spoke a couple of times concerning the digital health and the differentiation about how people understand working and handling this. So let's, with your permission, let's start by digital health. Can you please share with us what is your interpretation? What is the different type of digital health that you know?
So, digital health is a very broad term. We used to call it 30 years ago health IT. Because it includes a lot of the traditional things still today, such as all the system for capturing and storing and transmitting healthcare data, and even supporting life science and clinical operations. But it has been expanded to also include engagement software, for example, applications that help patients to be more engaged, lifestyle, wellness, and also all kind of health related purposes. So there is a whole layer of digital health that is actually hardly regulated. There's almost no regulation, if any, and you don't need clinical evidence. Above that simple layer, you have the digital medicine, which is anything that has to do with measuring health or intervening in health. And this is already a field that is pretty heavily regulated. You need a clearance or an approval, and you almost always need clinical evidence in order to get it approved. The highest level, and this is the king of them all, is the digital therapeutics. And this is where we actually try to use digital means to heal patients. This could be such as an app such as Pairs that was FDA approved, which is a prescription app that helps you get through your addictions through a very structured program. And here we have very heavy FDA regulatory oversight, and it is not even enough as you would with a drug or with a medical device to provide clinical evidence. You also have to provide real world outcomes. So I see here three layers, something very basic, which is engagement, lifestyle, wellness, and health IT. Above that, any digital medicine measuring health and intervening in health. And the highest level is digital therapeutics.
Dan, you've been involved in the pharma and the medical device for many years. Is a digital health really different from those fields?
I'm going to say yes and no. We're still talking about the same theme. We're still talking about disease. We're still talking about patients. We're still talking about physicians. But developments of pharmaceuticals and some medical devices, often the time will take 10 to 15 years. So, in many cases, after $100 million and 10 years of work, you only know that your pharmaceutical or your new drug doesn't work. And then it takes another 5 years to get it approved. In digital health, I often meet with founders who have bootstrapped the business up until now. They've been working in their garage and they're already ready for a limited pilot or for a market launch. So the time to market is really much faster in digital health. And this makes the whole field very different for founders and also for investors, because you can actually start to generate revenues within the first couple of years, whereas in pharma and conventional medical devices, it takes tens of years. I also think that what we've seen is that we're suddenly talking to our customers as consumers. We never used to look at the patient when we did pharma or when we did medical devices, because we would sell the medical device, for example, to a physician. We would convince a physician to prescribe a drug. But in most of the world, actually, in all of the world except the United States and New Zealand, you're not even allowed to advertise direct to consumers. So you had no route direct to your consumers. And when you can't advertise to them, you actually don't really see them. So what we've seen with digital health now is we've started to turn our customers, the patients, which is probably the most underutilized resource in healthcare. We've actually started to engage them. We've started to use them and utilize them to make the system better. So this is a huge change. In many cases, and these are some of the similarities, what we've seen is that the fact that a third party has to pay means that we are always so much more focused on the physician who prescribes and the insurance company who has to pay for it or the government who has to approve it. So these are things that are starting to change. We're seeing a lot of self-pay now. We are seeing digital health. We're seeing a lot of developments where actually the hospitals are adopting things because they save money or they simply generate more logical workflows. So yes, there are very big differences. From founders' point of view, it is a completely different discipline. If in the past I used to work with people who were really good at research and development and had everything needed to develop a product, today from day one we need people who know how to develop a market and especially how to generate revenues. So I would say for founders, this is a huge difference.
So actually, what you're saying is that from strategic point of view, you need to see differently your client's client in order to be more focused to whom you are sell with. Because we at Auren Israel also working in a strategic level, and we bring comprehensive solution to business organization from starting from a strategy, digital transformation, and so on and so on. So when you work with entrepreneurs and you work with investors, what are the differentiation between those two, and how from strategic point of view you add your value to them?
So what we set out to solve was the problem that at a very early stage in the business, you need to have a business model. And this sounds weird to someone who comes from outside of healthcare. But most companies that start out with medical development, technology development, or pharmaceutical developments actually don't have a very clear value proposition. They've recognized an unmet medical need, and they just assume that if you solve a problem, there will be someone to pay for it. In most cases, this is not true. But what we wanted to, and what we're doing today is we work from day one with the founders to generate a sound value proposition, to understand the market towards which they are going, to understand the interest of the stakeholders. And this could be the physicians, this could be the patients, the caregivers, and of course the payers. And understanding who wants what and why would a payer pay for something. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you have developed something that is incredibly comfortable for the patient. For example, you can do something at home that you would otherwise have to go to a laboratory. Let's say a blood test that can be taken at home. No one likes to go to the laboratory. You have to schedule, you have to come there, you have to wait, you get exposed to all kinds of sick people, and then you have to wait for the results. So now I'm offering you a technology, you can do the blood test at home. Now, this is very nice, but let's say that a conventional blood test, the payer would pay $10 for it, and this is going to cost $50. Now, evidently, the patient may be very keen on doing the blood test at home, but you have to convince the payer that it is worth their while to pay an extra $40 in order for the patient to conveniently do it at home. And this is a tricky issue. So what we do is instead of just investing money, we work through with the founders in a profound way to build a sound value proposition, market approach strategy, go-to-market strategy, reimbursement strategy, all of these at day one. Where is the big risk we are taking? We could get involved in some of these companies, and after we do a thorough analysis, we can discover there is actually no value proposition to be built. But this is why we have venture capital. This is the kind of risk that we are taking. And we can do that because the technological risk in digital health are usually much lower than in other fields of healthcare.
Well, you describe here so many aspects that you are dealing with the company that you are escorting, and you have mentioned here many phrases that are very modern, such as value proposition, strategy, and so on and so on. But may I ask you, can you give us an example and drill down about what was the steps that you follow with them in order that we will be able to get more clear picture about the way that you work with such a companies.
Yes, we can, for example, take and think about you've developed some sort of patch for remote monitoring, something that you can put on high risk patients. And all you need is that someone has to convince the patient to be monitored, someone has to monitor the patient, and someone has to do something if there is an alert coming from the monitoring system. And what I just described is really very simple. Let's say you've been released from hospital, you've been there because, let's say, a heart attack. You get sent home. You're, of course, as the patient, you're very anxious, and we put a patch on you, and this patch now starts to send to the cloud, and then there has to be some sort of alarm central that gets the data and does an action if something happens to you. This sounds like a very good and I think very nice. Any of us who would be in that unfortunate situation would probably like to be monitored after a heart attack. But when you come to sell this to a system, you run into oodles of problems, such as hospitals are very limited in the way they see their care. The hospital cares about you as long as you're in the hospital, but not when you're outside of their facility. So now you have to coordinate between a hospital and the community care. This is not a simple thing because the hospital will take responsibility for you until the curbside. They may put the patch on you, but then from that moment on, it is the community care that has to care for you. And if then something happens to you, the community care now has to get hold of an ambulance and have you hauled into the hospital again. So just to take this very simple case of monitoring a patient, and it's almost a no-brainer. Yes, a patient who has had a heart attack, you should probably monitor them the first week after you sent them home. But even such a simple case, you have to work through all the steps. And what we've learned over, I say, this past 5 years is that digital health is all about generating new workflows. It is all about getting organizations to work in a new way and what hopefully in a better way. And I think we all remember it when the old management systems were introduced into many organizations. Essentially, what we would do, all the ERPs, for example, we would have a business analyst analyze our workflows, and then we would digitize our essentially analog workflows. Now, when you digitize an analog workflow, you end up with a digitized analog workflow. So, what is so difficult and what we are working with the companies on is how do we help our customers generate a digital workflow? Because digital health, to a great extent, is to digitize healthcare providers. So that's what we work with our companies about. We're trying to get them to understand how hard this is for the customers and how they can help their customers to actually become better providers.
The content of your clients, it's something that it is very familiar, and I personally have a huge experience with this due to the fact that I've created a unique business methodology called the value selling organization that is focusing also on this stream. But do you have any type of examples to give us more understanding concerning your clients? Why? Because from my point of view, when I heard what you're saying, your client's client may change differently in different situation, where in the hospital it's one, if it's in the community it's the other one. The value chain is different from event to event. So how do you analyze all this um, subset of value chain? Do you have any well-defined methodology, or how do you work to define this?
Well, it's an excellent question because these are the things that we work with on a daily basis. So what we do is we try to find the path of least resistance to revenues. Where is there going to be least resistance in the market? Where do we generate the biggest, for example, clinical impact, assuming that everyone in healthcare wants to generate better impacts? And I can give you the example of now the COVID crisis, where remote monitoring had been very difficult to sell to hospitals. And then they suddenly, what the COVID did was, hospitals started to isolate patients. Now, think about remote monitoring. If you are behind a wall and your patient is on the other side, that's already remote monitoring. The moment you cannot approach and you are working in a contactless manner, essentially you need remote monitoring. So we took all these systems that had been developed to remotely monitor patients over 100 kilometers, and we said to the hospitals, use these solutions within the confines of the hospital. Patient is on one side of the wall, the control room is on the other side of the wall, and there you have a winner. You're now suddenly doing remote monitoring within the hospital. So I think a lot of it is to understand where at the same time you generate most value. And in many cases, it's not just a matter of finding the right customer, it's also a matter of finding the right country. Sometimes the geography is the determinant factor. Some things may be easier to sell in Japan, some things may be easier to get into the Scandinavian market, and things may be much easier to get into the US market. Can I say we have a methodology? We take it on a case to case basis. You have to remember we're working in healthcare, so one of the determining factors is where is the money? It's all about finding the money. Where is there reimbursement for doing something? As a rule of thumb in medicine, no one does anything if no one pays for it. So you always have to find someone to reimburse the provider. I would say, for example, the case of remote monitoring, there is reimbursement in place. The federal government is reimbursing for remote monitoring. So that has made it easier to introduce the products into the community care, for example, for elderly people and for chronically ill. Just as an example, can I say that if I had another technology, I would go the same route? Absolutely not. It's on a case-to-case basis.
Dan, I think that it's very interesting point of view that you are presenting and very practical. Where is the money? Who is the client? Bring us to understand, let's say, at least your interesting point of view of venture capital regarding the digital health. I want to thank you for sharing with us your opinions in this first episode.
Thank you very much, both of you.
And want to invite our listeners to join us to the second episode where you give us more insight regarding the digital health in the post-COVID area. Wishing you a good day, Ophir Angel and Amir Kahani from Auren Israel.